Good morning, everyone. Can everyone hear me just fine?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Lieutenant Richard Wahidi. I am brand new to AFCEA, so first of all, I want to thank AFCEA Atlanta for inviting me to speak about some topics that I'm very, very passionate about. And this title is called Protecting the Defense Industrial Base, of course, one of the critical infrastructure for our country. All right, so just a little bit about me. I am an active duty Air Force contracting officer. I'm stationed actually in Middle Georgia at Robins Air Force Base. Has anyone actually heard of Robins Air Force Base? Yes. Okay, thank you. Awesome. So my biased perspective is definitely the city revolves around the base. And in fact, I think it was created in around 1940 to support the World War II requirements. So my favorite Song of Ice and Fire character is Tyrion Lannister, for sure. And I'm actually probably a little bit taller than him, and probably not as smart as him, but he's for sure my favorite character. I will say he makes it, well, I'm not going to spoil anything, but he's my favorite character. And what do I do as a contracting officer? I provide life cycle contract support for research and development, design, production, delivery, and sustainment of airborne electronic warfare systems. Pretty gnarly stuff. And as a contracting officer, I am the direct interface with the defense industrial base, on whom we rely to fuel and sustain the national security apparatus. So I want to thank everyone who's part of the defense industrial base. So just a quick cartoon before we get started. So go ahead and let you guys read that. Right, so all of us have heard of the term digital transformation. We're all undergoing digital transformations as an organization, even in our own homes, and we have to now account for some of the real issues that creates, because there's benefits and there's cons. But let's start with what this presentation is not going to be about. This presentation was inspired by the idea of DevSecOps. Has anyone heard of DevSecOps? DevOps? Okay. So this is a model of what it is. It's really pertinent to organizations which develop software. But because of the increasing role of software in the world, pretty much every organization implements DevSecOps or DevOps, whether they know it or not. And they implement it or they don't implement it effectively. Now that's significant because what I would like to do is take the mindset, the principles of DevSecOps, and see how we can apply that to supply chain management, to cybersecurity, and to protect our businesses. And so why is DevSecOps really important? Well, the idea of development, security, operations, you realize that software is never done, and we can't do waterfall development anymore. We can't design a system, we can't develop it, test it, figure out whether it's secure or not at the end, and then deploy it to our customer. That's not working. That's definitely not working. And so one of the reasons why DevSecOps is so important is everyone is collaborating in an integrated fashion from day one all throughout the software development lifecycle. It's been highly, highly successful. DevSecOps, the term kind of was just created recently, the idea of DevOps. That's how the amalgamation originally was coined, development and operations. But to be honest with you, you can throw contracting in there, dev, contracting, SecOps, or whatever it is. It's the same concept, right? It's how can we build software? How can we build our software-defined products in an integrated fashion to deliver secure, safe, and reliable systems for our customers and deliver the intended value to our customers and value overall to our business. So that's what DevSecOps is, and it's an endless cycle. Now, what is the definition of DevOps? That's one of my favorite books, and I would highly recommend it if you haven't checked it out yet. It's authored by Gene Kim and published by IT Revolution, who are definitely thought leaders when it comes to DevOps and DevSecOps. The definition: the architectural practices, technical practices, and cultural norms that allow us to increase our ability to deliver applications and services safely, securely, and reliably. Now, I want you to replace that with the product and services that your company specializes in, and you get the same concept. And so let's see how we can apply that to our business. My objectives in this presentation: to provide an ontology for cybersecurity risks and supply chain risks. I'm going to try to draw a comparison between them. I don't think that people have realized, and I don't know everything, but I would offer to you that there is a clear relationship between those two. My second objective is to provide a paradigm for integrated risk management for DevOps-like outcomes in securing our business and securing our defense industrial base. All right, so underlying DevOps and DevSecOps is the idea of product management. Right, your company, whatever it is, you deliver products. You develop products and you deliver them to your customer, and I would imagine your objective is to do that endlessly as a for-profit company. You want to continuously innovate, and you want to make sure that you're continuously secure as a business. And so that's entirely different from project management. Project management is very plan-based, right? And me as a contracting officer, unfortunately, the defense acquisition system is still highly based off project management. And so success for me is following the plan. Even if I know it's the wrong product to deliver, for me, success as a contracting officer is following the plan. Well, I tell you what, I don't follow the plan. I don't follow the plan. At least I don't follow the plan that we conceived based on our own internal assumptions and then kind of condemn myself to the plan. So I iterate consistently, and so you can see how they're compared and contrasted. Project management is serial, it's stage gate, and it's kind of follows specific phases in sequence, whereas product management, there's the idea of continuous collaboration and integration of all functions within a system that is delivering or developing and delivering that product. So that fundamentally shifts how we think about value and risk. And it's really not going to become clear to you, until you take these concepts and then apply it to your business. But you'll learn with your own experience for your business context. But you can see the initial planning requires a framework of our initial assumptions and design versus significant planning internally, this analysis of our alternatives, and all this planning and internal stakeholder approvals that we get before we actually take our plan, develop products, and then deliver it to our stakeholders. So project management works when you have a stable market, which you can safely make those assumptions. But project management doesn't really work, this static project management, when you have a dynamic marketplace. And I would offer to you that you do make products, whatever your business is, and you do have a dynamic marketplace. And security is, of course, a factor in that dynamism. So remember how I talked about how the ideas of value and risk are fundamentally changed in DevOps and DevSecOps and product management. I can tell you personally, all of you have heard of the Iron Triangle, cost, schedule, performance. Let me just offer to you, as a contracting officer, someone working in the acquisition system, I don't care about the product if that's delivered if it's not secure. You don't either. Your customer doesn't either. Right? Unfortunately, security is not factored into the cost, schedule, performance Iron Triangle. Right? So the Iron Triangle has value, but we should look at it with a more nuanced perspective. And so product management, you can see there's kind of 4 artifacts that you should be concerned with. Right? There's feature. There's the architecture, which is not visible to your customer, but important to you as a business. Bugs or defects don't add value to your customer, but of course impact your ability to develop and deliver value to your customer. And then we have this idea of technical debt, where if we focus so much on delivering features to market fast, we may not make a sustainable framework for our developers, for our internal business to continue reliably delivering business. And bugs and defects and technical debt, security plays into that. We have to. So this is how the DevOps and DevSecOps is going to apply to how we think about risk. So supply chains. Here's an example, just a simple model of Dell's supply chain. Well, it's definitely not simple. Holy crap. So it's definitely not simple. So many facets of its supply chain. That is a global supply chain, and you can see how incredibly sophisticated and complex it is. And then in terms of how companies interface with each other and collaborate with each other, this is an example of the supply chains of 3M and Rockwell. Of course, 2 big companies that deliver products both to public sector and private sector customers. Wow. Increasingly sophisticated supply chains. Supply chains gets complex really, really quickly. And that creates both goodness and badness, as we'll see. All right, so as I'm talking about supply chains and I'm talking about how we can take this idea of DevOps and the principles of it, the culture of DevOps, and apply it to supply chain, I would like us to agree on some definitions. So supply chain, a set of 3 or more entities, organizations, or individuals directly involved in the upstream and downstream flows of products, services, finances, and information from a source to a customer. Hopefully that's an agreeable definition. Cybersecurity, the protection of systems, networks, and programs from digital attacks aimed at accessing, changing, or destroying sensitive information, extorting money from users, or disrupting normal business processes. So those are the definitions I offer for supply chain and cybersecurity. Well, I would offer to you that both of them are networked. Cybersecurity is for sure networked. We're really concerned about cybersecurity because we're protecting the network and all of its attack surface. But the supply chain is a network. It's not really, well, first of all, your supply chain definitely uses the internet, and it is not linear. It doesn't have to be linear. You wouldn't want it to be linear, but it is networked. And supply chains are complex, non-linear network systems that aren't easily controlled. And as we saw in Dell's example, just within itself, and then, of course, with 3M and Rockwell, these are highly complex. And again, that creates both goodness and badness. We have to think about how these networks can be fragile. All right, so here are some observations for me. Has anyone ever heard that phrase, software is eating the world? Nobody's ever, okay. No worries. So back in summer of 2011, Andreessen Horowitz, one of the famous investment institutions, let's say, on Silicon Valley, and they coined this phrase, software is eating the world. And I would recommend that you check out the article after this to kind of apprise yourself. But really, the article is hitting on this idea of we're continuously innovating to deliver value to our customers. And so as we're continuously innovating, we also have to think about continuously managing risk and continuously identifying and managing risk with the right system, with the right approaches. So software is eating the world. As a military contracting officer, I can tell you, if software is eating the world, it's eating the war. And if software is eating the world, then it's eating the supply chain. And that's what I would offer to you. So and what that really means is every company is a software company, and that delivers a specific product, right? A bank is a software company that does banking, right? The Air Force is a software company that delivers air power. It still doesn't think of itself that way, but believe me, it is increasingly adopting that perspective. But the organizations which do adopt that perspective are highly, highly successful, as everybody can be. So commercial and non-commercial products are increasingly digitally defined, right? So I support electronic warfare systems. Believe me, the software is entirely providing the capability underlying that system. And since last year, I didn't mention the word COVID there, but we've seen increased telework, right? Maybe within your own organization, you've increasingly authorized that. I telework from home, although I can share with you that I occasionally just go to base and work there, probably because I'm a nerd. I don't necessarily have to, but we've had to just remote work for our own safety, right? But we've increased our adoption of the internet and these tools that kind of expand our attack surface. They expand our productivity, but they also expand our attack surface. And so as a result, we see just increasing hyperconnectivity. Software is eating the world, and organizations are increasingly relying upon software and the internet, of course. All right, so what has happened for the past 2 decades? Supply chains, the concentrations of them, the epicenters of supply chains in the world have totally shifted. At the start of the millennium, the epicenter of global manufacturing was in Germany. It should stand for Deutschland. I think that's how you pronounce it. But so the center of manufacturing was Germany in the year 2000. And as a result of large-scale outsourcing to China, due to forced joint venture participation that the Chinese government forces upon its prospective customers seeking to do business in mainland, and a whole slew of other factors, the epicenter of global manufacturing has shifted to the extent that when COVID broke out, and I think many of us know this, the essential supplies that we needed just to manage the pandemic response were only available from China. This was true with pharmaceuticals, it was true with masks, it was true with a whole slew of different things. And so that definitely exposed a lot of countries, not just the US, but first world and third world countries just all over. The epicenter of manufacturing was China. And I don't want to make it political. It's not necessarily, we can have opinions about China or whatnot, but I want to just show this to you that the global supply chain epicenter has totally shifted. And a lot of us have dependencies on specific centers, specific countries. Another example is that for semiconductors, a lot of countries are dependent upon Taiwan, for instance. So let's define risk now. Let's really get a clear understanding of what we mean for risk. Risk is the probability of something happening which results in a loss, injury, damage, liability, or any other negative event from external vulnerabilities, which may be mitigated through preventive action, right? So risk is not a good thing. It can be quantified, and we can prevent it with the right actions and framework. The supply chain landscape. So as we've seen, the world is relying more and more on advanced hardware and software, which is defined as information communication technologies. Globalization of the marketplace means that those ICT can be sourced from hundreds and thousands of companies all over the world. Thus, you are knowingly or unknowingly an importer from the global supply chain. And as you are an importer, as your own supply chain is globalized, that also means that inadvertently you can import malware, right? Or do business inadvertently with the wrong actor. And so we do, of course, we don't want to do that. That's a risk. So we have soft underbellies. The government has a soft underbelly. The supply chain, of course, has a soft underbelly. And I would say further upstream we get in the supply chain, the softer the underbelly is. I would offer to you that in terms of like big technology companies, Microsoft, Amazon, they probably don't have that soft of an underbelly, right? But they rely upon a supply chain. They rely upon open source software, which we now consider, which lately in the news, we're now thinking of it as third-party software. They rely on tools from upstream providers who have a soft underbelly, right? So all of us have soft underbellies. But the good news is we are in this together, right? So we are managing this risk together. And so the key is to recognize that, in my opinion, in Rich Wahidi's opinion, supply chain management is an extension of cybersecurity. If they're both networked, and we have an increasingly digitized world, interconnected world, then supply chain management is an extension of cybersecurity. Notice I didn't say supply chain. Supply chain itself is not an extension of cybersecurity. They're two different things. But supply chain management is really managing the risk of our supply chains, managing the risk of that network. And I would offer to you that's an extension of cybersecurity. So there's this idea of provenance then that we should kind of apply and always kind of worry about with respect to our supply chains. I learned this word and this concept recently, but I'm glad I did. So provenance is defined as the chronology of ownership, custody, or location of a historical object. The end-to-end chronology, right? And if you are, in what we just talked about, if you have this global supply chain and whether you may be knowingly or unknowingly kind of importing malware or doing business maybe with the wrong actor, your challenge and our challenge is going to be managing the provenance of all of the products and items in our supply chain. And that's easier said than done. Honestly, there's probably not a single organization in the world who can do that end to end. There probably isn't. Right? Some can do more than others, but a lot of us have our own blind spots with regards to provenance. But this is how we manage supply chain risk, is through this idea of provenance. Are there any questions so far? Okay. All right, so Okay, I get it. So maybe you agree supply chain management is an extension of cybersecurity. So how should we think about supply chain management? So these are some of the fundamentals. So you have to identify the risk. You have to take countermeasures to manage them, right? So when COVID broke out and the borders got closed, of course we couldn't import a lot of PPE and masks to manage the pandemic here. And so that was a problem because we didn't know about it. A lot of people didn't know about it. So, but of course we had to start reshoring or nearshoring new sources for PPE, for instance, and that is applicable in many sectors. But you have to identify risks as they exist in your supply chain, and then you have to manage the provenance of those specific products and supplies. And this is where you definitely have to prioritize too. We cannot manage supply chain. We cannot manage the supply chain, i.e., the risk, perfectly. Just like we can never be unhackable or have 100% perfect cybersecurity. There's no silver bullet. So you have to really identify the risks as they exist in your supply chain. And then you have to prioritize what are the biggest vulnerabilities. What can I do today that'll help my business survive today and deliver value tomorrow? Right, so there's not just the idea of managing the risks today and prioritizing them, but when your supply chain gets disrupted, how quickly can you recover from that? Right? How quickly can you recover? Well, all of us are competitively disadvantaged in that case that we saw that PPE, the only source was from China, right? That is a competitive disadvantage. That is exactly how we got disrupted. But if you were to continuously monitor your risk, prioritize what is more important, what are the most important risks to your business, then when you have disruptions, you can quickly recover from them. You can quickly shift to different sources upstream and potentially even downstream within your supply chain to not get disrupted overall as an organization. So there's this idea of resilience, this idea of becoming immune. And that's how, incidentally, DevSecOps is so strong when it comes to the software development lifecycle, is because when it comes to security in DevSecOps, there's the idea of shifting left. Right, through the software development lifecycle. Bake in security, use automation as much as you can all throughout the software development lifecycle. Well, we ought to think about baking in supply chain management all throughout the supply chain, right? And so for us, maybe shift left in a supply chain management perspective would be, who are our upstream suppliers? Who are the organizations we do business with upstream, and who do they do business with? So how do you do all that? That's really complicated, really sophisticated stuff. We got to start mapping the supply chain. And I'm sorry for the sheer length of the paragraphs, but supply chain mapping, this idea of information visualization is really, really important. It is really, really important because it allows us to see those pockets of risk. And by the way, I will be sending these slides out afterwards, so you're going to have to forgive me for the just kind of lazy wall of text that I put in there. But when it comes to supply chain mapping, let me give you a metaphor that I have seen in the military, and I think it's really important to apply that here. So firefighters, they use this tool called a thermal imager. Has anyone ever heard of that? Okay, well, a thermal imager is really important tool because it allows you to point it to a building that may have a fire, and it'll show you based off of a heat gradient, right, that's visible to the person holding the tool, the firefighter, where is that most critical pocket fire in the building, maybe on the ceiling, that I need to right now target all my efforts and focus to put out, because that's where it can spread like wildfire, right? So that's how, how the thermal imager is so important to a firefighter's mission. Now, information visualization tools, particularly that allow us to get a high ground perspective, right, of our entire supply chain, I would offer to you that is one of the best tools that you can get, because the last thing you want to do is you want to map the supply chain and kind of manage it with Excel worksheets and kind of email them back and forth. And believe me, it annoys me every time when the government, we still do that. Believe me, we still do it. Well, a lot of organizations still do it, but change is slower in the government, even for me as a buyer, as a contracting officer, believe it or not. So I wish I did not have to do that. So supply chain mapping, really, really important. But one thing I wanted to hit on here too is we have to also think about how we can change our approach to doing business. in some key areas. So of course, the government, we tend to be overly focused on security, right? And so DevSecOps has really good adoption, early adoption overall within the government. But we also, I would offer to you that hiding information or trying the best to limit disclosure to other parties, it doesn't necessarily help everyone involved within the defense industrial base, because we may be inhibiting ourselves from collaborating on the same risks. I would offer to you that we are exposed to a lot of the same risks. Imagine, for instance, on the example of PPE. Imagine if we had a proprietary PPE supplier domestically here in the United States, and they, because to maintain their competitive advantage, they didn't share that their supply chain was getting, kind of, exfiltrated, or maybe even just through normal business practice, kind of offshored overseas, right? So that is a dilemma, right? That they probably did not have to be in that situation if they sought to kind of share that vulnerability, all right, kind of be transparent with it, but make themselves stronger in that process, right? If they had adopted this DevSecOps mindset, saying, hey, this security vulnerability that only I'm experiencing, I may not be the only one. And if I start collaborating within this industrial base, I may get better outcomes. And I would offer to you that there are technologies that exist, such as like the blockchain, that would help us collaborate and kind of eliminate this idea of middlemen, which is kind of create some ethical dilemmas. But that's, just hold that thought for now in terms of blockchain. But what I wanted to offer just on this slide is we have to visualize our supply chain, get that high ground perspective of it. And then we ought to think about, as we increasingly start to collaborate, we have to be more selective in what information that we limit disclosure to, because not all of it is proprietary. And this is not really political. I can share this to you, but in the government, a lot of data is just marked proprietary, but it's really not proprietary. It's just a scare tactic that would, cause me to be scared and not give that to other contractors and competitors, even though it's based off of common science and known knowledge at this point, right? So, but it doesn't scare me, right? So, because I know it's not proprietary.
But like, wouldn't that be a concern of some people that are submitting contracts or like doing research and development that people can use information to their advantage for almost anything, for a lot of things. And somebody's submitting a proposal or telling you something about their product that they think is proprietary. I guess what would make it proprietary? Something that would earn money or something that will put in the head? It's a lot of definitions for a lot of ways.
Yeah, I guess. Are you asking like how should we think of proprietary and
Well, how we should think about it for your
so
people that are from like if we're
sure.
a contractor and we're submitting something to you.
Sure. So as a contracting officer, generally, I'm responsible for implementing law, right? And so proprietary is really governed by the Trade Secrets Act, right? So if something is not actually proprietary, but is marked as if it's such to kind of mislead the recipient of that data, then I'll just scrub it off, or kind of ignore it, because I would see it as scribbles on the data. It's not really proprietary, and they're not going to be able to sue the government. If they do, it would be a waste of time. But without getting any too specific about it, but I would say proprietary matters are governed by the law for sure. There, one example is the Trade Secrets Act. But if something is not actually a trade secret, if I can Google it, if I can Google how to make this, and clearly all these different sources can tell me exactly how to make it. There's even DIY guides on YouTube and all this stuff. It's not proprietary, right? So something that is open source at the extreme end, that's the entire proof that something is not proprietary. Because if in fact something was a trade secret, then it ought to stay a secret, right?
All right, I just have a follow-up question.
Yeah.
So with supply chain and the risk management that's kind of going on, is CMMC kind of put there to help mitigate that stuff?
So we will talk about CMMC, and I'll give you probably a contrarian opinion that maybe we haven't thought of yet, but I think it's a practical perspective. We'll talk about CMMC at the end. But supply chain map, we have to map it, and we have to be mindful of what is actually proprietary and that we want to maintain legal rights to. All right, so continuation. Again, apologize for the length of it. Right now in government, within the executive branch and with developing legislation, many leaders, particularly within the contracting community, we're working with legislators and the executive branch to see how we can change the law or change policies that would, in a way that would incentivize increased transparency, not in a way that would create damage for any party involved, but reward those behaviors of contractors that are taking that initiative to share information, right? If you are a contractor who's getting, maybe you're in a uncompromising situation where you have this critical supply and you're subject to this risk, but you need help to be able to manage that risk. We want to reward that behavior because that is positive behavior for everyone. We want the entire defense industrial base to be as resilient and as active and as healthy as possible. We want the defense industrial base to have that DevOps mindset, right? So, and supply chains are dependent on infrastructure a lot of times that's outside of our control. We cannot control that, but the sooner that we're aware of those risks, right? The defense industrial base is just one critical infrastructure. There's so many different other ones. I think there's a total of, I should know this, but I think there's a total of 17. I think there's a total of 17 specific critical infrastructure sectors. The defense industrial base is just one, right? So visualization will help us trace and be mindful of the risks that exist in critical infrastructure, and then that way we can manage disruptions as they happen much more effectively. And so what is the solution to all this internally as a business? Market intelligence. Part of it is that information visualization, but also actively surveying the market to see who is in your supply chain, in that supply chain network, who is newly gained in your supply chain, right? What are the joint ventures that are going on in your supply chain? Are they with shell companies that may be suspicious, right? And so forth. So, and on that note, I will say the executive order, there was two recently passed that's on along the lines of supply chain. There's Executive Order 14005, which is talking about changing the criteria for domestic sourcing, for the Buy American Act from cost to amount value added. Because I would offer it to you, if you define the requirements of Buy American Act of percentage of cost from a domestic source, then you can have these kind of shady companies that are just providing a token amount and may actually be a source of risk, right? So the Buy American Act is changing. There's going to be a director of Made in America, I believe, so that there will be a specific office that is managing the authority and responsibility to make some of these decisions. And then there's also 14007, and I'm not sure if the 100 days have passed yet, but I know that a lot of the executive department, their secretaries have to identify what are their most critical vulnerabilities. Oh, wow, kind of short on time here. So I'm going to start winding this down. But some of the thoughts I want to leave you with is that a supply chain is not just a network, but it's a social network. It's a social network. A supply chain is a social network. And so we have to take advantage of this fact. We have to take advantage of this fact and engage. Know that the government is passing legislation, passing policies that would authorize people like me to reward that behavior, folks who are treating the supply chain as a social network and collaborating to make the entire marketplace more resilient. And we also want to make sure that the law that's passed only penalizes contractors who would knowingly withhold information. Supply chain disruptions, hacking, and all that. This is kind of a weird perspective, but they're really kind of routine incidents. We're really not that surprised anymore when hacking and supply chain disruptions happen. They will happen, and it's not always your fault. It's not always anyone's fault. And so we should only penalize behavior that is withholding information, and we should reward the sharing of information transparently to be as open source as possible. And then you probably skip this one, but just on this slide, I would urge you, and definitely feel free to engage afterwards, I would see if you can create contracts that have terms and conditions that already do this for you, that give you an incentive for transparently sharing information and then limit, and then only disincentivize when one would withhold information, because that is a strength for you. It's a strength for the government. And then the last thing I'll share here is that what can you do today? What can you do today to manage that supply chain risk as it exists? As we talked about, it's an extension of cybersecurity, and to start to map out the supply chain risks both upstream and downstream. All right, and so here is just one of the last slides is there's this idea of technical debt in software development lifecycle. If we're always focusing on delivering features, we may not thinking about the architecture, the framework, the platform that's enabling that secure, reliable, safe delivery of software. Well, I would offer to you that supply chain management risk, if we have not thought about actively and continuously, then you are accruing technical debt in your supply chain. So final thoughts. The CMMC. So this is my thought on the CMMC is that the CMMC is not really in your best interest. You should do it. Don't get me wrong, you should do it. It's a start, but it is ultimately, it's a static assessment, and it's also really about compliance, because you'll get audited every so often. You'll have level 1 to 5, but ultimately I would offer to you, the CMMC is really about the recipient is really for me, people like me, or for acquisitions, because it enables a business decision. If you don't have the CMMC cert appropriate, you're not going to get the contract, right? But if you do, then it's not a problem, because you're compliant. So, but compliance should be easy. We should get the CMMC certification that applies, but we should think about immunity. We should think about resilience. We should think about how can we end-to-end within our supply chain build products and deliver them securely, safely, and reliably. And so our adversaries have almost no allies, but we have many. All right, we have many, of course, and so that is a strength, because the defense industrial base rises and it falls together. So that's my thoughts, and that's the end. Thank all of you very sincerely for supporting the warfighter. Thank you. So I don't think we'll have time for questions, but certainly after the slide, I'll take them. So sorry for going overboard.